All right, so I'm Dr. Emily Penny, and I am here today with Lena. And Lena has a amazing story to share with you guys. And so we're going to be talking to her a little bit. Hi, Lena. Welcome.
Hi, Dr. Penny.
Hi. So thanks so much for being with us today. And I invited you on here because I think your story is really inspiring. And I know that you've been excited about what's been going on for you. And so I just wanted to share with the group, like what your experience was like and, where you were at and, kind of where you are now and how that journey's been for you. Okay. So let's kind of start with, first of all, like how you found us and what you'd been doing prior to finding us and, just where you were at back then.
Sure. So I had been having like IBS type symptoms for a while. And in the beginning, thought I could sort of take it upon myself to do research on my own and sort of self-treat myself, and slowly realized that A, it wasn't working, but B, my symptoms were getting worse.
Mm.
And they were starting to move beyond my gut and my digestion system. So I first reached out to like a primary care doctor who then referred me to like a gastroenterologist.
Yeah.
Um, and I was advised to go through a colonoscopy, which came back totally normal, and all of my sort of routine blood work that checks for like liver and other things all came back normal. So was sort of disappointed just because I knew I wasn't doing okay, but everything was showing up as being fine. So after a couple of months of just sort of being in a bad place, my aunt actually had a neighbor of hers who had similar gut problems and had seen a naturopath in Canada. And so she researched like top naturopath in Durham, North Carolina, and your name appeared. And so I think I first reached out to you via like a 15-minute like free consulting call just to see if you would be able to help me. And then I think the one thing that you said where I was like, okay, I think I can trust you, is when you told me like, don't think it's in your head, that
Mm.
sometimes these issues, like people can tell you that it's stress or it's psychosomatic, which I had heard a lot. And so I think it was really reassuring to have someone tell me directly, like, no, there probably is something physical, like an underlying health thing that's happening. It's not in your head. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, so it kind of went from there. And that's how I started seeing you. But it was definitely after years of sort of ignoring what was just a very basic like gut issue, and then progressively got worse until I tried to take action but kind of didn't know where to go. And then I think out of like frustration and even desperation of feeling like normal doctors weren't providing any solutions or seemed to sort of understand, or um, yeah, I think there was just like a gap there in how to treat those kind of issues. And so
Yeah.
that's how I
Yeah.
found you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So when you first came in, I mean, I know this, but if so you can share with the group, what what was going on for you? What were you experiencing?
Sure. So my main symptoms that I had had for the longest time, or when this had started, so a couple of years at that point, was just severe constipation. Of just it started of just like not being able to go to the bathroom, but didn't have any like abdominal symptoms other than that. And then over the course of a couple of years, like by the time I came in to see you, I had severe constipation, but also severe bloating, which
Yeah.
I had never had, like gastrointestinal pain. I also had like food allergies that I felt I had developed. So I noticed, for example, that dairy and like gluten were starting to aggravate me,
Mm.
even though I had never had any issues with those foods before. And then I also had like a series of secondary symptoms, I guess, which had moved beyond my gut that I also hadn't had before, which were like severe fatigue, feeling kind of just like not able to focus,
Yeah.
like a little cloudy, um, lack of energy, and then also a series of like skin and eye issues, um, which kind of looked like, I guess they could be diagnosed as rosacea, but just a lot of skin inflammation, skin redness, skin irritation, which was also common also in my eyes, like a lot of eye itchiness and just inflammation in my eyes. So those secondary symptoms had developed after years of not treating the gut issues. But by the time I came to you, I had like a whole host of issues that were very much systematic or systemic at that time. And so kind of felt like I was at a roadblock of just, I couldn't compartmentalize sort of anymore in my life because the health issues had become such broad spectrum that they were impacting my ability to work out and go out with friends and drink wine on the weekends and just like carry on a normal 20-year-old's life.
Right.
So yeah, that's sort of, by the time I saw you, those were all the symptoms I had been experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's right. So, and if I recall, you also was it affecting your ability to work and go to school and that kind of thing? Had you kind of put your schooling on hold, right?
Yeah, I had been okay, I think, up until when I saw you in terms of maintaining like work. Um, and then I came home basically because I couldn't work anymore. And I was concerned also about my ability to pursue like future dreams of going to law school.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had come home with the idea that I would take a few months off to really figure out what was going on with my health.
Yeah.
Um, so I had mentally sort of blocked off a few months of just allowing myself not to do anything so that I could get to a place where I could go back to that stuff. Um, and I'll talk about it more, but as the treatment has progressed, I've very much been able slowly to sort of go back to working, like having more productive days, waking up earlier.
Mhm.
Um, so definitely sort of in the transition now, not 100% back to um, where I was at before all the gut issues started, but
Yeah.
definitely every day slowly starting to feel like myself again, which when I came to see you, at that point, it had been so many years of feeling off that I think I had forgotten what it felt like to get a good night's sleep and wake up and have energy.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a lot of this stuff, as you had mentioned, sort of builds up slowly in the background until like one day it seems like it hits you.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like, even as the symptoms progressed, they happened so gradually that they sort of became my new normal. So
Mhm.
things that weren't normal seemed normal to me because I had kind of gotten used to them. Um, but now that I'm like healing, I look back on it and I'm like, wow, I was really in a bad place and probably didn't fully realize how badly I was feeling. Um,
Yeah, I hear this a lot from people where they've been suffering for so long that they can't remember what it's like to be well,
yeah.
right? And so, you're kind of going through this right now and seeing this unfold, and the opposite can be true too, which is why it's great to have this conversation right now where you're at, because you can still remember what it was like, because we forget that too.
Hmm.
So when you were, before you started seeing me, I think it would be helpful for our listeners to hear like where you were at emotionally with this stuff. Like how were you how was it what was it like for you to be feeling like this at age where you were like in your mid 20s, right? So mhm.
Yeah, I guess once it progressed past the gut issues, because when it was mostly gut issues, I still found a way of compartmentalizing. So it was not comfortable. It was a lot of discomfort because I had constipation, but not necessarily to the point that it was impacting a lot of things. But as soon as it progressed to visible symptoms as well, where it affected my face, also my eyes were really uncomfortable. And then also I started getting like acute pain in my stomach and severe bloating. Once it reached that stage, yeah, I mean, it took a huge emotional toll, partly because other people aren't going through it. And so even in talking to family members, they didn't fully understand. Um, and of course, it started impacting like my ability to socialize. So everything from work, like work meetings or like events in the evenings or events on the weekends, I was still kind of like dragging myself through them, but was slowly sort of starting to isolate a little bit. Not so much like socially, but more just like mentally and emotionally, of not being fully there because I didn't feel like myself, but I couldn't pinpoint it. Um, and then of course, once like the fatigue started getting really bad, it started impacting how much I could do every day, which like as a in my mid 20s, it's such a critical age where you're putting a lot of energy into your career and trying to figure out next steps, which slowly I found myself sort of not being able to focus on because I was increasingly getting worried about my health. And I think the worst thing is just not knowing what it is. Like when tests would come back positive, and x-rays that I had done when I first started seeing like constipation symptoms, when everything came back normal, but I still don't feel okay, it messes with your head a little bit of thinking like you can think your way out of it, or like it's your gut and like your body will just like fix itself. I think that stuff also was an emotional toll of just like my body was out of whack, but it wasn't rewiring itself the way like your body often does without you noticing. And so, yeah, I mean, I was emotionally, it was really tough. I think it's hard for me to fully remember that time because it was kind of a dark time, if you will. But when I think about it, yeah, I was definitely in a dark place and
Yeah.
didn't know who to reach out to.
Right, right. And I remember when you first came in to see me, you're telling me that you thought it was just in your head. And, and then I was like, well, I don't think so.
Yeah,
So,
I thought it was in my head.
yeah. Because that's what you're told, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought it was stress.
that's the write-off. That's the write-off. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, maybe in some rare cases that's true, but not usually. Not usually. Not in my experience. It's very rare, actually. So
Yeah.
okay. So thank you for sharing that. I know that'll be helpful for people because a lot of people go through that. A lot of people go through that similar kind of journey. So tell us a little bit about, kind of what it was like for you to go through the program.
Sure. So I would say, I think as soon as I started working with you, I felt a huge sort of emotional relief of just like not having to go in circles in my head of
Mm.
researching and finding solutions. Like you can put your trust in someone who A, heard you out, and B, knows what he or she is doing. And so right away, even though I physically wasn't feeling better, emotionally, I just felt like I didn't constantly have to think about it because it
Mm.
was being dealt with. Um, so that was a huge relief to begin with. And then in terms of the program, I think it's really great to have clear sort of understanding when you start. So I think you really helped me out in saying like, this will take 3 months to heal, this will take 6 months, and just giving me sort of a time frame so I could mentally prepare myself.
Mm.
Um, because 3 months in retrospect, when thinking that it took 5 years to get really bad in terms of how this developed, from when I first started having symptoms, 3 months isn't that big of a deal, but when you're living through it, it feels like eternity. So I think it was really helpful to get a very clear picture and not have someone who's like over promising or not letting you know like what you should expect in your treatment. Um, so I would say, I mean, as you had said, it did take time before I really felt a turning point physically. I would say around like a month to 6 weeks in was when there was like noticeable change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when we completed a second round, which put me at like around 3 months, there was also a noticeable change. But I would say it's definitely, you kind of have to take it day by day and look at progress in chunks of time. Because especially when I started, day to day sometimes was really up and down. So some days I would go for a few days of doing great, like having normal bowel movements, seeing like my symptoms easing up. And then it would feel like randomly I would have a few days where I felt like, oh, I've sort of gone back. Um, but every time I sort of had a relapse, those relapses got less severe and shortened. And so when I would look back, like over a month or 2 months, there's huge improvement. I can't even think about where I was back then. But I do remember going through it, and some days I would get thrown off because it definitely is like, it's not a linear progression of healing.
Right.
And even now we're like around 3.5 months in, and huge improvement, but there's still some days where things feel a little bit um like I still feel my digestion. It's not totally back to like a mindless task of, you eat and you digest and you move on. It's still like a little bit off sometimes. So it's definitely
Mhm.
something you have to take day by day, and also understand that you will be working with your naturopath or practitioner for a set amount of time. And so I think it's really important to trust that person and also have like a healthy client patient really or practitioner patient relationship where you're kind of in it for months. And so it's not going to be a quick like take this bottle of medicine and you're
Yeah.
on your own.
Yeah.
um, and so I think going back to like having that trust, it's really important because it is a journey. It does take a few months, which is a miracle to think, your body can sort of reverse a lot of these things in a few months when you've been suffering for like 5-6 years. Um, but yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's a treatment that you have to focus on. Like you really have to want to put in the effort to heal, which I think anyone who is feeling as badly as I did would put in the effort. But you have to keep sort of track of it, like make a schedule or a calendar for yourself, like help yourself out so you keep track of all the medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and then just keep in touch with your provider, because I think for me, every time I felt like if I had some bad days or I felt like I had relapse, being able to reach out to you and quickly get a response of like, oh yeah, this is normal, like this is what's going on. It was just like, okay, I felt like I could turn the page and like move on.
Nice.
Whereas if I didn't have that communication with you, I feel like I could have resorted to going back to negative like thinking habits around.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that was really, really important in terms of having ongoing communication with you.
Nice. Nice. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. And, I think that, you touched on a lot of really, really important points and things for people to really think about. And having that long-term vision of like, hey, this is not going to be something that's going to be an overnight fix, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but if you stick with it and you stay focused on it and just keep going, that the outcome is and it will come into view. And
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be different for different people, I mean, for the kind of thing that you're working on, with that more of that constipation picture, it can typically take a little bit longer.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really helpful for people just to kind of have that idea in mind in advance of like, you know, we're going to move you through it as fast as possible, and it's not going to be overnight.
Yeah.
The end will come into sight, and it is possible to get there if you just stay with it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Lena, you know, catch us up where you are right now. Like, you know, how is your energy level now? How's your mental function now? How's your body feeling in general? Sleep, skin, you know, all those things that you mentioned. Where are you at now in terms of like percentage of improvement of those things, would you say?
So I guess with my case, we had a couple levels of stuff, which was first the SIBO and second the Candida overgrowth,
Right.
which you had mentioned from the beginning. Oftentimes you see them together. Um, and so just from your guidance, I kind of mentally knew SIBO might take 3 months and Candida might take closer to 6 months. It was sort of unclear. A lot of the symptoms I had, I think you see in both cases. So it was kind of hard to attribute one to one thing because a lot of those symptoms overlap. So I guess where I am right now, most of my days are good days. I have gotten rid, for the most part, of the constipation. Like my bowel movements aren't completely normal in terms of where they were before, but they're normal enough that I'm not uncomfortable. I don't have discomfort when I eat. Um, and I don't have any more of the bloating or the sort of abdominal pain.
Nice.
Um,
Yeah.
and then in terms of fatigue, that has slowly gotten better. So I would say right now, like I'm able to work and wake up early, like not need to take naps during the day. So my days are definitely longer and more productive. I think the last sort of set of symptoms that I still very much see, I think, are some of that like inflammation, maybe leaky gut kind of stuff of just still having like some inflammation in my skin and my eyes. So a little bit still of like that rosacea redness.
Mhm.
Um, Still like the effects of like weight gain. So still not totally back to like my normal weight. So I think some of those like after effects I'm still dealing with, but in terms of the actual gut issues, those are pretty much gone. Um,
Nice.
yeah, so,
Mhm.
and we still have like a couple months left in terms of some of that Candida work. So
Mhm.
I know I'm still in progress, but I would say I'm probably at like 75, 80%.
Okay.
Um, yeah, which is a lot. I mean, given where I was, like 3.5, 4 months ago, that's substantial progress. And so I had read that sometimes like the skin stuff goes away at the end once everything else has sort of fixed itself, that the skin is oftentimes the last to heal because it's the least critical. So I
Mhm.
think the core of the issues are currently sort of being fixed. And sort of those lingering side effects, I think, will probably hopefully go away in the next couple of months. But yeah, I would say I'm probably, yeah, 75, 80% there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. I really feel like it's a message of hope for people, you know?
Yeah, and I would just tell people to
Mhm.
just really take it day by day, because when you're in it, you've gotten so used to it that you can't really visualize yourself being healthy again. Um, Especially I think with these sorts of issues, because they oftentimes people have them for so many years before they figure out what to do with them.
Yeah.
But I would say like for me, after a month or 6 weeks was really when I noticed like a turning point that I wasn't going back to anymore. Like I wasn't fully there, but I could already tell like there's no way I'm going back to where I was. And I would say like every month to every 6 weeks, I feel like I hit another turning point where I'm like, okay, even on my bad days now, they're 100 times better than where I was when I first started, which sort of gives you the inspiration to keep going. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, though, I think like the constant communication with you plays a big role in that, because even now, like I know there's still lingering stuff, and it's nice to know that um it's not like the traditional sort of care where you finish and then you're done and you don't see your doctor again. That even now, if I felt like there were other things that were still kind of out of whack, I feel like I could still come to you and we would still find a way to continue making progress. And so I think that's super important.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Lena, how do you feel at this point, in terms of the value of what you receive for, the exchange of money in terms of investment in your health? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially in the US, and at least the state where we live right now, sort of naturopathic functional medicine care is not always covered by insurance. Um, and there's obviously a practical element to care, which is the amount it costs. For me, though, I was so in such a bad place that as long as I trusted the person I was working with, I wasn't really worried about the cost. And I know that not all people are fortunate enough to be in that position, but at least for myself, I never like sort of second guessed the cost of the supplements or the diagnostic tests or appointments with you. But I also think trust again plays a big part in that. I didn't have to worry about whether the supplements I was receiving or paying for were going to work, or whether the treatment plan was not put together well, or any of those questions. So I never had to worry about that. And so I knew that all the money I was investing in this was going to pay off in the end. It was never something that I second guessed. And so um, I never hesitated to pay for the supplements or the tests. And I think you did a great job of always finding like the most like not over testing or doing unnecessary tests.
Mhm.
And I think when I compare to my experience with doctors, yes, sometimes like the copays can be quite low, or some things might be covered, but it's also just going around in circles. And so the amount of time and money that you sort of pay, like getting referrals and seeing different doctors and doing like random x-rays and random colonoscopies and like very invasive procedures, it's just not worth it. And so I think when working with you, it was just so simple of like, this is your treatment plan. We're going to test and then retest again at the end of this amount of weeks. Like, these are your supplements. It was a very simple process, and and I got all my money's worth, if not more. I think like health is an investment. And I think in talking to you and knowing that these things might not be disease now, like they're completely reversible, but with time, I can't imagine how much worse they could have gotten. So,
Yes.
and then you're talking about heavy amounts of cost,
Yeah.
right? And potentially getting diseases that are irreversible.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and then you're sort of stuck and dependent on, who knows, monthly prescriptions, or um, living the life that's less than fulfilling. And so I think I came to you at the right point where things had gotten bad, but as you had said when we first met, it wasn't a life sentence and it is reversible. And so I was fine with the investment totally.
Yeah, great. Great. Thank you for putting that into perspective, because I think it's helpful for people to know about that. I mean, as you said, like the co-pays are maybe a little bit less for some people who are used to paying from insurance. But by the time you add up all of the costs of uncontrolled IBS, at the end of the day, it ends up often being more expensive going the conventional route, and it doesn't fix the problem, right? Because they're
Mm-hmm.
just treating symptoms at best. So yeah, that's a really good perspective. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah,
Like,
and I
mhm.
think once the other side effects start showing up, you're not just paying for IBS. Like I was going to 10, 20 different dermatologists trying to find answers to skin issues, which might not bother some people, but bothered me a lot. And right, and so then you're going to be dependent on like skin medications that A don't really work and B don't really get to the root issue. And so yeah, I think it's the IBS stuff, but also like some people would have been put on antidepressants or like energy medication, or I mean there's a whole host of things that I was noticing that I was starting to have to see more doctors because I had all these, even going to the ophthalmologist and asking like why are my eyes so dry and why are they red, and all these issues that no one could answer. And so
Mhm.
between seeing the gastroenterologist and then 5 different specialty doctors trying to chase after these symptoms that kept showing up versus just getting to the root of the issue and fixing it for good, I think, yeah, it's an investment that is so worth it. And also it becomes part of like a health journey of just
Yeah,
like eating healthier and just slowing down a little bit and taking the time to take care of yourself. Um, and I think if anything, especially right now with the coronavirus, like especially in this country, you're just seeing the effects um, on all levels, like on national levels, but also just in the healthcare system of just what happens when people don't partly take care of themselves. I mean, some things are out of our control, but if you look at like the underlying issues that are leading to deaths in this country, they're issues like kidney disease and obesity and heart disease, and a lot of things that are in the very beginning reversible issues
yeah,
and issues that stem from eating well and sort of seeing a
absolutely.
primary care doctor and taking care of yourself and building up your immune system.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say that, yeah, you
Mhm.
cannot, I think, not take care of yourself, and any investment is worthwhile.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. Because we don't just stop. We're not going to just stop at treating the IBS, right? Like the next step is
Hmm.
optimizing your health and really getting a plan together for your long-term optimal health goals.
Hmm.
And that's where you can take it even higher and get that really that vitality and longevity for life
Hmm.
that separates the average American or the average Canadian from those who are really committed to taking care of their health long term and living their best life. So yeah. And I wanted to also speak to this idea, this myth, that IBS is not curable, because it is pervasive in
Hmm.
the community, and it's really unfortunate because I see people healing their IBS every day, but because conventional medicine does not have the answers for it, people end up because they're not getting better, right? So they end up believing, oh, it's not curable. So I'm curious how because you said something a little bit about that. I'm curious how you feel about that now.
Yeah, and before I quickly answer your question, I would say part of the solutions I was given from traditional doctors was to take stool softeners, and just like other things that just keep you maintaining that are not actually getting to why you have constipation in the first place. Um, and I think a lot of people are on that cycle where they're basically told like you just need to manage it for the rest of your life.
Right.
And for whatever reason, I was just like, no, there's no way. I mean, there's no way I'm doing that. I refuse to live my life that way. Um, and and the idea that that's something you have to live with, I think from our first meeting, I was reassured that it doesn't need to be that way, and that there are actually like concrete things like root causes in your body that you could point to that are contributing this, and like you can fix those. um, and so when I look back on where I was 3 months ago. I wouldn't say I'm at the place where I'm cured, but I can clearly see how one can put IBS behind them and not need to worry about it again. And
Yay.
I, yeah, yeah. And also sometimes along the way reminding myself, like, I didn't have this before. And so if I
Right.
develop it, I'm sure my body, if it's given the right tools and I'm being, sort of walk through a treatment protocol that works with someone who knows what they're doing, that my body will reverse this. And so, yeah, I would say definitely find someone who knows what they're doing, like yourself, because I have a lot of friends, and even family members who would say like, oh, IBS sort of, it sort of runs in our family, or like we all deal with that. But the reality is that you don't need to deal with it, and it shouldn't be normal to have to deal with it, or think of it as like a lifelong, sentence that you somehow have to manage every day by popping pills or taking weird things. So yeah, it's definitely reversible, and I think you just need to give your body the right tools, and um, work with someone who has implemented this with people and has seen it work, and also someone who believes that there's a cure to IBS, because how horrible would it be to work with someone who thinks otherwise? It's not very inspiring.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that stuff is very important because, um, as I said, as soon as we had our first meeting, I just felt like at that point I had gotten the nudge I needed to just like push through it for a while longer until I could see results.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think if I hadn't heard like certain words from you, then it would have been harder to find sort of that fight within me to get through the first month of treatment without seeing results yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. Well, that's really, really helpful, Lena. Thank you so
Yeah.
much
Yeah. Of
for
course.
sharing your story. It's been amazing to work with you too. And I want to just make the mention that a big part of this is your willingness to
Mhm.
jump in and do the work, because I can only guide the fact that you took it and ran with it, and
Mhm.
that you were committed to your outcome, and you didn't stop, and give up when you didn't get it right away. That's what really makes the difference, and that's the difference between people who get the results and who don't.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for staying with it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's yeah, it is amazing, and I hope everyone, it just takes sort of like one jump. I mean, even when I remember the moment of like sitting in a cafe with your sort of website open and waiting for a few minutes before deciding to pick up the phone, really in a moment of desperation. And then I did, and ever since then there's sort of like no looking back. I mean, I can't imagine where I would be now if I hadn't picked up the phone and called you. And so I would just say for people to sort of take the jump, and if you find someone who you can trust, which lucky enough I did, yeah, to just like go all the way with it, because eventually you'll wake up one day and notice like, oh, I beat it. It's not as much a part of my life anymore. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are opening up our program nationally, and we're able to do that by moving it into a consulting platform online. And so for people who don't have access to naturopathic care otherwise, we're making it available, because there's a lot of people in a lot of states who don't. And
Hmm.
they just have no access to this kind of care at all. And
Hmm.
so, we found a way to make it work across state lines and even internationally.
Mhm.
so that it's accessible to people and it's affordable and we give a high level of support. So we're really excited about that. And so, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, and we're gonna keep you going and keep you on your momentum. And any parting words before we go today?
No, I would just tell people to keep up the faith and don't give up, and trust that, don't feel like you need to do it on your own. Like there are people out there who know what they're doing and have done this over and over again and seen it work. And so, like, reach out for help, and yeah, don't feel like you have to deal with it on your own, because you don't. So,
Great, great.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.